All right, we are live.
Welcome to the second edition of Innovation Minutes Live. Today, I'm kind of excited about our topic because in a way it's kind of fun and funny, but also sort of disturbing. So this story caught my attention earlier this week. The NBA created this new rule where you have to be nice on Twitter. The teams have to be nice, which is an interesting thing to try to regulate in and of itself, which we can come back to that. But several of the teams, Sacramento and Atlanta, decided to then kind of subvert it and be sarcastic and overtly nice to each other, which then became a very funny exchange that did not seem natural or genuine at all. And it got me thinking about how companies also try to regulate the way that employees engage with each other and the tone and the types of conversations they have. And of course, some of that is necessary from an HR perspective to make sure that people are not sued all the time.
Yeah,
but I think there is a tipping point where you have to allow people to be human, or people just completely disengage, or they try to subvert it, as we saw with the basketball example.
Yeah, it's kind of like what we talked about last week with the power of this technology comes responsibility, right? And you would think, or at least I think the original theory was that when these tools were launched, and you know who people are on the internet, and people are saying things publicly that's on record for forever, that should be a self-regulating behavior, right? But I think if we've seen anything over the past year or election cycle or whatever you want to point to, I think that's obviously not the case.
There's been some conversation as to whether or not, as a result of everything being public and permanent, we would become more boring and self-regulate, or we would just lack all boundaries and we would have to then adjust to the fact.
I think we all know which way it's going.
Yeah, we have not become more boring. I think
no, but it is interesting because the NBA, while not as well organized as something like the NFL, which also has its own social media policies, right? You can't tweet during games. They don't try to restrict what players can do at home. But, if somebody goes home and tweets about Roger Goodell, they're going to get a fine. So it is very much kind of a workplace and employee relationship. And, because it's out in the public, it's not necessarily a privacy issue.
Right.
Because it's public domain, but at the same time, kind of begs the question, where is that line drawn between company time and private time?
And what's appropriate from like a criticism perspective as well.
Right.
What is, and some of that is just common sense discretion. Certain things should be discussed in private and directly, and others are better aired publicly. And sometimes there's an escalation involved in that, but I don't think there's a hard fast rule for it.
No, I don't think so either. And and it also kind of begs the question: should there be, right? Do consenting adults, do we need permission and approval to speak, right?
Well, and also, what's the best policy for getting the best, most consistent work? And I think that's where the new technology, that these sensor technologies that reading the Bloomberg article that came out, I think this week, about tracking employees' behavior in the workplace. So you always know where they're at, where they're sitting, who they're talking to, what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I think the question is, do we have any data about that actually incentivizing productivity or producing better work?
Right. I mean, it's being done, per the article anyway, it's being done in the name of efficiency and, knowing when to turn on lights and how to better situate a workplace, and that's all fine and good. But you could easily see the companies building this kind of technology taking it one step further when people accept the fact that they're being constantly monitored in the workplace, right? And then back to the earlier part of the conversation is where's that line drawn? If somebody's answering emails at 9 o'clock at night, are they still on company time? Are they being monitored?
Yeah.
So these are all questions. But to your point, what does that do to the person? Forget efficiency and process and all of that. What does it tell the person that's being monitored? We don't trust you enough to regulate your own behavior or to be at your desk or any of these things. So we need to track you like a dog.
Right. It's actually contradictory to the studies that have been done about working remotely. Consistently, and many people are aware of these statistics, but consistently studies show that individuals who do have the flexibility of working remotely and do take advantage of that at least several days a week tend to be more productive and more engaged, in part because they want to make sure that no one thinks they're slacking off. They're self-regulating in that way. And also they're in an environment where they're comfortable and they can control a lot of the elements. And if they have to take an hour break but want to work late at night, there's that flexibility. And so I think when we over-regulate and over-track, we don't understand the nuanced variation of how we do work and how we perform best. And not everyone performs optimally at 8 a.m.
Right, or set hours, right? And I think that's probably true for most people. But the bigger issue is if you're trying to build an innovative company and you want all of your employees to constantly be thinking creatively and everything, how does a censor regime support that or not? I think these are probably things that should be tracked and studied as much as how much turning off or turning on lights can help a company.
And I also think there needs to be the space to be fully human. A large, quote unquote, innovative tech company, which shall remain nameless, issues directives from HR to remember that your fellow coworkers are coworkers and not friends, and you should treat them accordingly, but hey, you should also engage in all these extracurricular activities with them. That's really hard to synthesize as a person.
Right.
I'm supposed to be hanging out with these people and bonding with them, but I should never think of them on a human level. And I understand why some HR departments might go that extra length to create that barrier. But when we overregulate, we undermine the humanity that I think actually makes people connected to a brand and a workplace and have the loyalty, and you see that in employee retention.
Yeah, well, I mean, look at where that's coming from, right? You have a department called Human Resources. So it's not,
right.
It's not people, right? They're resources, right? That the company regulates in a certain way and uses in a certain way. So I think, yeah. Well, I think that's probably all we have time for this week, but it's also a good segue into next week, which I think we'll talk a little bit about language and semantics and how that is weaving an interesting story here in business and in politics and global affairs too.
And I think just to end this week, I'd love to put a call out to individuals to share how they're either seeing these regulation tactics and censors and employee tracking policies. How are they seeing them operate in the workplace, both the positives and the negatives, and what your opinions are on that. So please.
We'd absolutely love to hear that, because all we read is what's in the news. So, people are better.
All right. Well, thanks for joining, and we'll talk to you next week.
All right.